tell me what your role is in this project.
Thank you, Ralph. I am the person fortunate enough to portray Count Augustin Haraszti, the Hungarian who founded Buena Vista Winery in Sonoma, and I'm also a history person, and so I was the human who created the verbiage and acquired the photographs that together comprise the history gallery portion of the 1881 Historic Wine Museum and Tasting Room here next to the Oakville grocery.
And what was the impetus to do a history museum in Oakville?
Jean-Charles Boisset, of course, the remarkable gentleman who owns Raymond in the Napa Valley, Deloche in the Russian River Valley, and Buena Vista, and with his family, 25 wineries in France, is a passionate believer in history, and he did not think that in Napa there was enough emphasis on the history of this remarkable wine region, and so 1881 is a celebration of the history, and the general idea is that there are 16 AVAs, American Viticultural Areas or appellations, in the Napa Valley. So here at 1881, you can taste wine made from each appellation. And when you visit the tasting room portion, we have glass urns with representative soil and dirt and earth and rocks of each AVA. And we have Cabernet made from each AVA. We have topographic maps. You can look at where the AVA is. You can think about the difference in soil and weather that makes each a distinct AVA. And then here in the history portion of 1881, we have the story of each AVA. Why was it named Wild Horse Valley? Why is it called Calistoga? And so my task was to create an accounting of each of these, and history is full of stories. So to take the stories and then create a comprehensive framework that they hang off of, and thus the History Gallery in 1881.
How long did it take you to put this together?
It took about 5 months for me to do this, and it was a fascinating and pleasant experience. I love history, and I love stories, and there are many, many remarkable stories on the walls of 1881.
Well, if I'm correct, the Oakville Grocery is the longest continuously operated store in California, which is quite a remarkable thing for such a little town.
Indeed, Ralph, I completely agree. And in the words of Jean-Charles Boisset himself, we are right here on the Champs-Élysées of the Napa Valley, with Tokelon across the street. In the backyard, we have Opus One. And as you walk into the Oakville Grocery in 1881, you see Mount St. Helena in the distance. It is a wonderful place to be and to celebrate history.
What was your process in putting this together? I mean, putting museums together is a complicated process, and yet you were working basically from scratch.
Various history books, and my own knowledge of Napa history. I have been involved in the history of both Napa and Sonoma since 2001, and had my favorites already. A lot of time spent in libraries, and of course online now you can get a lot of stuff. That's certainly true. It's very fascinating to go to the 12th or 13th page on a topic, and you'll find something. It's like searching for gold, really. Something you didn't know. Way in the distance, and this future is incredible in that way. Finding out information.
Well, it's also for each one of the AVAs, you have an interesting story about that AVA, and that took some digging.
Well, the tricky part was choosing a date and a beginning for the AVA. The most important person to the AVA. Who would that be? David Hudson is featured on our walls because he was the first person to plant grapes in the St. Helena AVA, what became the AVA. Of course, AVAs are a modern notion. So he was the first person to plant grapes within the city of St. Helena. a gold miner and an exciting individual. Grizzly bears were a terrible problem, Ralph.
Oh,
And David Hudson in his diary describes how grizzly bears were so common when he and his fellow immigrants from the settled United States came to California. They built enclosures up on the tops of oak trees and lived in them virtually day and night, and tents below. But there was nothing they could do about the grizzly bears other than try to, make them go away as quickly as possible. George Yount, who received a land grant from his friend General Vallejo after putting wooden tiles on his roof in Sonoma, described in one horseback ride from Sonoma over the Maya Common to Napa, seeing over 40 grizzly bears in a single 4 or 5 hour ride.
oh my gosh.
You never went up into the hills without dogs, because the last thing you wanted to do was to be surprised by a grizzly bear.
Right.
And so the dogs would make sure that wouldn't happen. The
Yes.
dogs would be, 20 dogs would be around you. So you would not come across, say, God forbid, some bear cubs
Yes.
without their mother, because
worst.
their mother's right around the corner, as happened to Hooker. He was hunting with an Indian guide, Joseph Hooker, when he was living in Sonoma in the early 1850s, middle 1850s, and he was hunting not for grizzly bear, but he saw 2 little cinnamon cubs in a clearing. He'd put his rifle down, and in fact, the Indian said, "Let's go," and Hooker said no. The Indian said, "Goodbye," and exited stage right. A few seconds later, the female grizzly bear attacked Joseph Hooker. This is a true story, and a huge grizzly attacked Joseph Hooker. His rifle was against a tree, but he did have a Bowie knife strapped to his leg, and he was so physically adroit, he was able to avoid the talons and claws of the grizzly and put the Bowie knife into the heart of the bear, killing her on the spot and saving his life.
Yes. Amazing.
And a pair of boots was made from that bear, and you can see those boots at the Depot Park Museum in the town of Sonoma as part of the Sonoma Historical Society, and those boots were worn by Ulysses S. Grant at a costume party in San Francisco in 1852.
Amazing. Amazing.
That's a cool story.
Yes. Well, Hooker and Grant would have both been graduates, I guess, of West Point.
Of course, and this is all a part of the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48, and they all served down in Mexico. Many of them came up to California. Grant, of course, ended up a junior officer in Humboldt County, where he fell into a Great Depression, and in fact was offered the choice of court-martial or resigning his commission because of his incipient and uncontrollable alcohol use.
Huh?
And he did resign then from the Army, ended up in Galen, Illinois, working for his father-in-law, and when the Civil War came, then he was transformed into the savior of America. We feature Rosalia Vallejo Lease, who was the young lady who met Jacob Lease at a party in San Francisco. We feature her. They went on to have 7 children and a remarkable character, General Vallejo's sister. We have a Vorby lady on, you're mentioning, a picture of her in a carriage. So I thank you. I've done my best to tell the story. As you go up the stairs, you'll see a photograph of the woman who married Jacob Lease, Eliza. And in this photograph, taken on her wedding day, when she was 15 years old, back in Missouri, and she is from here to her toes enveloped in dark black clothing, and she looks strangely tranquil.
Yes.
But when you think of the wedding day photo
Right.
of the 1840s to today, it's an interesting sort of
Yes.
dichotomy. I put that picture there to recognize the difference in our
Yes.
wedding attire.
Yes.
Indeed, California was dangerous. Coming to California is extraordinarily dangerous. Jacob Leese, a remarkable man, and a man who made a great deal of money on the Santa Fe Trail, and as a fur trapper in the Southwest. He was one of very few people who survived into his 70s. As a fur trapper, the life expectancy was about 2.5 years.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, it was extraordinarily dangerous. Bears, like people, would have personalities. Generally speaking, people don't become rapacious murderers of other humans.
True.
Sometimes bears would,
Yeah.
and would be extraordinarily dangerous, but generally they got along with humans.
Well,
There was a lot of stuff to get.
yeah.
It was called the beautiful place.
Right.
And humans lived in this valley for 600 generations.
They say it's the longest continuously occupied spot in North America.
That is almost certainly the case.
Because it's idyllic in many ways. I mean, in terms of everything grows here. And yet it's still cool enough that it keeps the insects and things like that under control.
The word starvation did not exist in local Indian languages. Impossible to starve.
Right.
Over 90 languages spoken in California. There were over 80 different tribalates, and it was a paradise on earth. Jean-Charles' father, Jean-Claude Boisset, acquired an entire museum 10 years ago by a Frenchman who spent 30 years collecting viticultural tools, and then a third of that came to Buena Vista, where you can see it on the third floor of the Champagne Cellars, the historic wine museum. And some of those tools then have come here, and so a wide variety of tools. And we use these tools as a way of being, helping people understand the world of wine.
Well, there's something wonderful about a tool that's been handled a great deal. You know, it gets imbued with the energy of the people. It gets shaped by the hands that use it and the tools and the plants that it's
Indeed.
used on. Who set up the displays? Because it's really done
There is a young man named Florent, and he is the gentleman who is in charge of a place called the Imaginarium in Burgundy. And if you go to Burgundy, to Neuilly-Saint-Georges, you may visit the Imaginarium, and in the back is where we make Boisset Collection. Our parent company makes a great deal of Cremante Bourgognes, sparkling wines from Burgundy, and there's also most of the collection, which is several rooms of tools and a soundlight visual presentation that is interactive. There's screens with a movie projected upon them. The tools move, lights. It's quite beautiful and is fascinating. And some of those are at Buena Vista.
Well, so he was flown over and installed
Yes.
here and for an extended
Yes, he
period of
created
time.
the tool chandelier as you immediately
Yes.
enter 1881. It's right above the welcoming desk.
So-
We have some very rare tools. Soil injectors, the tools that were used in France between 1873 and 78 to attempt to kill the phylloxera bug. There are around 500 of them left upon the earth. We have 5 of them at Buena Vista. We have 3 or 4 here. So many rare tools. Most of these tools required approval from the French government to take out these tools, take them out of France.
Uh-huh. I'm not surprised.
They're on loan.
Yeah, I'm not
from
surprised.
France
Well,
to us.
many people who are not from the wine region don't know the story of phylloxera and how this louse attacked the European vines in the United States and then made its way to Europe from people bringing plants from one country to the other, and how it infected the plants there and almost destroyed the wine industry.
Well, it is the single most important story in the world of wine, and so we do talk about that at Buena Vista, and I talk about it a lot. It's a story associated with the Count, as it is likely that the Count himself was the first to bring phylloxera when he acquired root ball sacks of grapevines from New Jersey.
And it's also interesting that right past the injectors are the grafting machines, where they developed the grafting techniques to basically save the industry by grafting them onto American vines, which were naturally resistant to the louse since they had developed in that region.
Indeed, as an American bug had lived with American rootstock for millions of years. Vitis vinifera, no resistance, of course. Over 5,000 different Vitis vinifera grapes appeared on Earth by themselves millions of years before humans walked upon 2 feet. It is one of the ironies of our world that all these fruits and vegetables were waiting for us, Ralph.
Yes, fortunately.
Waiting for us to know how to cook them
Yes,
for us.
exactly.
It is a curious thing. We owe the Rudd family a great debt. All of us. History itself owes a debt to this family who loves history and spent many dollars in 2012 completely retrofitting the Oakville grocery, which had no foundation. They had to go below the earth and build it up again. They took all of the wood, all of the elements of the building, took them off, built a foundation, and put them back
I had
at
no
great
idea.
expense.
I had no idea.
And if it had not been for the Rudd family, it wouldn't exist. As this building as well, where 1881 is housed, the old Victorian house. The Rudd family, tremendously generous in saving these 2 iconic buildings of Napa.
It was interesting that he took such joy in this property, and it's interesting you have 2 people in a row, Leslie Rudd and Jean-Charles Boisset, who have focused on this property as if it was a little jewel.
Well, we feel it is a jewel, and we thank the Rudd family for all they did for all of us. History is what we share. It is. I've never understood, Ralph, people that don't feel about history the way I do. It's always puzzled me. It seemed very clear to me that if we don't know history, then we have no hope in understanding the world.
Right.
And so history has been my fascination my entire life. I'll tell you, Ralph, an interesting story that I did not know before I began this project. Wild Horse Valley. So where did the horses come from? And it is now believed by most historians that indeed the horses appeared there on a specific day. Really? As you see, it was on June 14th, 1846, when the Bear Flag Revolt took place in the city of Sonoma.
Yes.
Now, on June 11th, in the Sacramento Valley, it became known to the revolt, to what became the revolting party, Ezekiel Merritt, that Lieutenant Arce of the Mexican military was bringing 150 horses from General Vallejo's rancho to General Castro's Santa Clara fort or presidio. And of course, at the time, to get from Sonoma to Santa Clara, you had to go through the Sacramento Valley, as it was impossible to get there any other way with 150 horses because the delta was impassable.
Right.
And so Lieutenant Arce was surprised by Ezekiel Merritt and 5 other revolters, and they stole the horses. And in fact, it's another interesting tale. Lieutenant Arce and 3 other Mexican soldiers were having lunch, and Zeke Merritt and 5 revolters rode into their camp with their pistols and arrested them. And Lieutenant Arce said, "Well, you surprised us. You could never have taken us like this unless you surprised us." And Ezekiel Merritt, a man of whom his contemporaries said had an air of alcoholic menace about him at all times, literally said to Lieutenant Arce, "I'll tell you what, we'll ride out and then we'll ride back. How about that?" With guns blazing, would you prefer that?
Right.
And Lieutenant Arce said, "No, it's okay." and Zeke left them their horses and their pistols and said, "By the way, you can go back to General Castro and tell them, we're seizing Sonoma. We'll get there before you, but that's where we're headed."
Wow.
And so they brought this entire horse herd with them and deposited them in what became the Wild Horse Valley. And that herds of horses were there ever since June 13th, 1846.
Wow. Good story.
That's an amazing story.
Good story. I always wondered about where that name came from.
I was so happy when I heard the tale.
That's so good. So
because it connects everything.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the point.
Oh, yeah.
Connecting everything. That's what historians do. We search for the story and the connection and the story.
Right.
The story of Nathan Coombs, what a remarkable man.
Oh, yeah.
Whose city of Coombsville never really took off across the river from now the city of Napa. But the luckiest man in California, he laid out this city of Napa in the summer of 1847, and 9 months later, gold discovered, and property values doubled every 4 months for 4 years.
Because the only way to get there was through Napa. Right.
And it's an exciting time.
Yes.
The gold rush was the most interesting time in American history when in 14,000 Europeans in all of California in 1846, only 14,000 in the entire Mexican territory of Alta California, which was not a regular department of the Mexican government, was a frontier region and did not have regular governance, which is why General Vallejo was the Comandante General of Alta California. Essentially, the military governor of a frontier region did not have regular, the same rights and rules as Mexico proper. And so, once again, and remarkable stories.
I'll tell you one of my favorite photos in the entire collection, and of which there's an amazing collection of photos, is the picture of General Vallejo with his granddaughters. Surrounded by his granddaughters. It's just a charming photo, and I didn't realize he was born on July 4th.
It is an interesting story, and yes, indeed, I will tell you, for your listeners, a remarkable tale about that exact topic that people who are interested in history will find fascinating. So, we know he was born on July 4th because in the 1960s, Meiji Emperor Brown, one of his descendants, found his baptismal certificate in the catacombs of a Roman Catholic church in Mexico. It had somehow gone from Monterey down to the repository, and it said, Mariano Vallejo, born on July 4th. Now, the curious thing is that on the general's tomb in the city of Sonoma, Mountainside Cemetery, it says July 7th, 1808. We know he was born on July 4th, 1807, from that baptismal certificate. But the plaque upon his tomb was put there many, many years earlier in the he died in 1890.
Where's his tomb?
Mountain Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
It's a very impressive edifice. And so in 2007, a committee of Sonomans, formed to honor him on his 200th birthday. Now, we convinced a mortuary supply in Napa to change the date for free. And it took a lot of work with the city of Sonoma that owns Mountain Cemetery to allow us to change the plaque. But we never knew whether or not General Vallejo himself knew his birthday was July 4th.
Oh.
And in fact, we know that he celebrated his birthday his entire life on July 7th. And it was unclear to us. Well, we changed the date because we know that was the date. And a couple years ago, Peter Meyerhoff, local dentist and tremendous historian, told me that he had been found a letter written by General Vallejo 3 years before his death in 1887 to a member of the Native Sons of the Golden West, Chapter 111. He was a member of that, Native Sons, because he was a Native Son.
Yes, Monterey.
And in this letter, he says, "So happy to see you on my birthday, July 7th." Which now shows that the general himself did not know, and it makes you think that his family changed the day. And perhaps because they did not want their son born on American Independence Day. This is just simply conjecture.
Yeah.
But there you go, one more interesting historical tale.
That's the kind of things that did happen. You know, making the whole cloth out of a history takes time.
And as you ascend the stairs here at 1881, what I tried to do is tell the story and not be explicit about it. So it starts with General Vallejo, and then it goes to Jacob Leese, who started Los Carneros, one of the AVAs. He was the first to plant grapes in what became the Los Carneros AVA. And so as you go up, they're sort of related to each other, but not explicitly like you would see in a textbook. They're related to each other in the stories, which provide a framework as you move up the stairs to the second floor of 1881. And at the very end, you find my favorite character, Sam Brannan, who started Calistoga. And it is absolutely historically true that he coined that phrase because he raised a glass at a celebration of his Sam Brannan Hot Springs Resort, which he patterned after Saratoga, New York. And he literally said he wanted to say to the Saratoga of California, but in his incipient inebriation, the words came out to the Calistoga of California. And that is a true story. And that is how we got the Calistoga AVA. From a drunken statement by the most interesting man in California, Sam Brannan.